Okay, so in this presentation we will discuss how best to present your work as a graduate student. You will be expected to make oral presentations at conferences, at your confirmation and during your defense, so it is important to know how to best make use of those opportunities and leave an impact with the audience, unlike this horrible block of text, right? And yet you will see that. So you will see people present their work in that manner, facing the screen, long loads of text on a slide, and expect anyone to be engaged. That is not going to happen. So the idea behind this talk, and what we've done is we've taken some slides from Kyle's former supervisor, Katie Compton. She built these slides with another professor on how not to give presentations. So we'll try and go through this on a slide-by-slide basis and see how we go.
So why do you want to give a good presentation? You want people to understand your work, but more importantly, because in the 15 or 20 minutes that you have standing in front of people at a conference, they won't understand every detail of your work. No matter how great of a presenter you are, they won't, because it's not enough time. But you want them to be interested in your work and think that you're great, so that they say, wow, I really need to go read that paper, and furthermore, I should give them a big job offer. But what happens if you give a bad presentation? People fall asleep, they don't pay attention, they chat, they laugh about other things, and even if they're not laughing about you, it's disconcerting to hear people laughing in the audience when you aren't trying to be funny. And worst of all, they think that what you did isn't interesting or isn't important. And if that's what they think, they're not going to cite it. And citations are what's important for you and for us.
I mean, it's interesting that if you turn up to a conference, you'll sometimes find that people pack into one session, and then within a couple of minutes, people are trickling out, some having coffee, some going to other sessions. And clearly you know that what's happened there is the presenter has not been able to keep their audience interested. I think this is a very important point. Your presentation is not your paper, and it is not your thesis. Your presentation is a complementary presentation of information that complements your paper at a conference, or complements your thesis or your confirmation report in an examination setting. It is not a replacement. It is not just a reworking. It is supposed to be something complementary, and therefore you do not necessarily have to present every piece of detail that's in your paper in your presentation. People think that they need to somehow shrink those 10 pages into 20 slides. That is not how you should think about a presentation. The idea with a conference presentation is to present your work, make them interested in the paper, and get them to read your paper, and then maybe follow up on that. And at your examination is to tell the examiner, who may not be an expert in your area, what the story of your work is and why you did it. Right? So do not think of the presentation as having to condense your whole paper into 15 minutes or your whole confirmation report into a 25-minute confirmation presentation.
Right. And the thing to remember with this is that just like how in your paper you don't give every line of C code and every addition operation that you needed to perform in order to get your work done, in the presentation you're not going to give every detail from your paper in order to get people interested in your work. In fact, if you try to give every detail, they're less likely to be interested. So you want to pick what is the one thing, or maybe two things at most, out of my paper that is the thing that I can get somebody excited about. And that's your chance. This is your one chance to stand in front of people and get them excited about reading your paper. Because after that, you're hoping for Google. You know, you have one chance to say, people are listening to me and I can give a presentation. After that, everybody's going to find it just by Googling for things with the terms. And so you want to take advantage of that. So we're going to go through some tips of how to give good presentations, separated into two parts. The first part is about presence and how you orient yourself in front of an audience, how you speak, the things that you do. And then the second part will be about the slides themselves. And primarily we're going to do it with examples of what not to do. because it's more fun to see all of the bad examples, especially when we're not pointing it out during your own presentation. You get to see something where you can make fun of us instead. So the first thing is that we're trying to keep the audience interested and keeping them with us. If we do something that makes the audience immediately say, "Oh, what's for lunch?" that's not a good thing. We want them to be excited to follow us along. And so there's lots of things that can affect this: the topic and how deep we're going into it, the attitude of the presenter himself, or your mannerisms. And we're going to see some of this in the next couple of slides.
Unfortunately, sometimes it's where the program committee has put your talk, right? So there's the graveyard slot, which is the one straight after lunch, right? And there's also the last session of the whole conference where half the people have left because they're trying to catch flights. So some of them you don't have control over, but if you can at least optimize the ones that you do, then you're probably going to get a better result.
So the most important thing, and it should go without saying, but unfortunately it often doesn't, is to know your topic. Be prepared to get questions. Questions are good. Questions mean that people were listening and they were interested and they want to know more. Questions don't mean that you've done something wrong. But don't be afraid to not know the answer. Knowing when to say "I don't know" and knowing how to say "I don't know" is much more important than trying to come up with a BS option on the spot to try to get them off your back. Because if you say something that they can immediately say isn't true, they're not going to trust anything that you said before. And so don't just stand there and say, "Where's my advisor? My advisor isn't helping me. Nobody asks the question. I do nothing." Be able to just say, "Oh, that's an interesting question, and we haven't thought of that." Or, "That's something that we haven't explored yet, but we'll think about it in the future."
Yeah, I think it's important to note that your audience will have professors, and professors do not expect graduate students to know everything. And they will help you if they feel that you're engaging properly and you're not pretending to know it all. I remember my first conference experience. So at Imperial, they would take us to a conference in our first year PhD. Every new batch of students would get to go to a conference. And at one conference, we had a student who was presenting, and he was asked a question, and he just dug deeper and deeper and deeper into a hole. And the supervisor didn't get involved, but he just sat there shaking his head because the student couldn't just say, "I don't know." So there is nothing wrong with saying "I don't know," right? At all. Especially as a graduate student, there's no issue with that. So if you can offer some feeling, right, to go with that, that's fine. But do not make things up, because to make up your experiments, you have to sit in a lab and come up and write things. You're not going to do that on the spot at a conference in front of an audience of 200 people, coming up with a proper solution to that question.
And be able to recover from interruptions. There will be situations where you're going to get distracted for a second. Somebody's going to enter the room and they're not going to be careful and the door's going to make a loud noise. Or the battery for your microphone will run out in the middle and suddenly it's silent and you have to wait a minute for the battery to be replaced. Or there'll be big feedback in the system and there's a screeching. And although it can be really uncomfortable to deal with something that isn't going exactly perfect, trying to be comfortable enough with your topic that you can just say, "Oh, well, hopefully we move on and there's no more problems. Let's continue." Just a little something like that can help you make sure that you're going through correctly. And it's also important to know what to skip if you're running late. If you realize that I have a 20-minute talk and I'm at 18 and a half minutes and I still have 35 slides, don't try to get through all of 35 slides in the next 90 seconds. Skip some slides and say, "Okay, I see I don't have time for this, but the important thing for my talk is," and you make sure that you give the takeaway. Because for every few seconds after you've passed the time limit, people are more and more aggressively not paying attention to you. Because they're mad that you didn't let them go to lunch, or you didn't let them go get a little cake and a cup of coffee. And you don't want them to be mad at you. You want them to say, this person gave me the takeaway and finished on time.
I think that it's important as well when giving a talk to keep track of time. I don't know why that some people, that once they get in, they're zoned out and all they're focused on is showing their slides and they've got no clue how far into their presentation you are. The presentation mode on various software gives you a time or a clock. If you don't have that, have a watch. If you don't have your watch, borrow someone's watch. Keep track of time. I've borrowed watches in conferences to make sure that I know. And then set yourself some sort of milestones in your presentation, right? So after 5, I should have reached here. After and if you're running behind, then make sure you do that one, because we've seen people who overrun. And just because your session chair at a conference is not banging on about how you should hurry up, it doesn't mean you should just carry on. So some session chairs do the job atrociously and just keep no track of time whatsoever. Then it's your responsibility as a speaker to still stay within your allocated time and finish. Otherwise, you're just making life difficult for everyone.
This is especially important because people will sometimes say something like, oh, I see I'm running late. Shall I continue? Who in the audience is going to be the person that says, no? You don't want to be that person that says, no, please don't continue. But everybody's thinking it. Everybody says, no, I really need to go to the bathroom. If you could wrap this up, please, that would be great. And so don't make people have to be aggressive with you in order to get you to stop talking. Know that you have a time limit, and respecting that time limit will make people happy. And this isn't just about students. There are some well-known professors in our field that sometimes talk too long, and so it's important for them to learn as well sometimes that even though they're an important professor, wrap it up. So the next part is to really know your audience. Do they have a full background like yours? How much hand-holding do we need to go to step by step go through the problems? Or can I jump right into the specifics? How much do I need to motivate the work? Does everybody believe that my strategy is an important strategy, and so we just need to look at the details? Or do I have to convince people that this is an area worth studying? How much detail should I put in? You know, sometimes there are audiences out there, although reconfigurable computing is not one of them, where if you don't have math, they're not going to be happy with you. Reconfigurable computing is the opposite. If you have math and it's not justified, people are going to be angry. And so knowing your audience and knowing what they expect from you is an important part of the presentation.
Yeah, I think another interesting thing is, as a PhD student, don't forget that you've spent some time, right? So by the end of your PhD, you've spent 4 years in a hole working on this one tiny thing, and you're an expert, right? But the people in your audience, you need to think of them as you when you started your PhD. So when you're telling a story, try and tell that story to your pre-PhD self and see whether it makes sense. And in fact, this applies generally, right? Even teaching undergraduates, I cannot walk into an undergraduate class and say, yeah, we can do this and we do that. I have to think of what the undergraduate knew and what I knew when I was an undergrad, which is atrocious, right? So I build on that assumption and then make sure that I tell a story that makes sense to those people, not to myself. I think this audience, this understanding of your audience is the #1 factor in being able to give good talks. If you can't relate to your audience, if you can't sit on the other side of your presentation, then you haven't got a clue, because then you're talking to yourself.
Next is know the location. Do you need to bring your laptop? Do you need to bring a USB key or email the slides to somebody in advance? Do you need to go back to the 1960s and create transparencies?
You shouldn't go to that conference.
Maybe you can make plastic yourself and start from first principles. But how far is the audience from the screen? Can you point with your hand at things here? Or are you going to need a laser pointer? These are important things to think about, because if you practice in front of your laptop and you say, look at this here, then nobody is going to know what you're pointing at. And we'll see this again, but it's important to think about your environment and try as best as you can to practice in an environment that's similar to what your final talk is going to be. Are you interested in your topic? If you're not, you should find something else, because the most important thing is sounding like you care about what you're doing. If you get up in front of the talk and you say, so what I did is I added some C code here, and then I gathered the data, and whatever, here are the results. Why should anybody care about that? Because you don't care about it. So you have to say, hey, this is the most exciting thing that I've done over the past 3 months, and I really want to tell people about my research because I think it's important. And so you want to have something to get people excited. But the important part about this is to don't talk down to your audience. And this relates to knowing your audience. So you may know more about them, about how you implemented this particular thing or the details of this particular paper. But if they think you're arrogant, there will be people in the audience who can make you look like a fool. And those people get increasingly mad and increasingly likely to try to make you look like a fool if you act arrogant and you talk to them as if maybe you'll understand how awesome I am someday, but for now, just trust me, I'm that great. So, are you hiding behind the podium? Do you stand completely motionless? Or stare directly at one person, your laptop? Do you look like this and talk at the wall so that you don't have to think about people? If you're doing this, you are boring. And if you're boring, then you're likely to hear snoring. And so we want to take care of that. Be exciting. I know it can be difficult and it takes practice, but scan the audience, look at different people, try to move a little bit, make it so that you're not standing like a statue. But this can go the other way. I can talk really fast, I can be really excited, and I don't know what I'm doing, but I've got Mountain Dew, and oh, coffee. Oh, okay, no, the next thing, wait, calm down. Enunciate your words. Be ready to talk calmly and breathe. We don't want anybody to hyperventilate and pass out on stage. People need time to think about what you're giving them for information. It's not a race. We're not trying to finish a 25-minute talk in 5 minutes or less. Take a bottle of water. One of the best ways to slow yourself down if you know that you're likely to talk too fast is make yourself take a sip of water after every slide. Now don't take a big sip so that you don't need to go to the bathroom in the middle of your talk. But a little sip can be good. Is this thing on? Tap, 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 tap. Is there any feedback? I can't tell. PA systems are tuned so that the microphone can be down here. It's not supposed to be right in front of your mouth. And you need to modulate your voice evenly. Now here, because I'm not using a microphone, I'm going up and down, and it's okay, because I know that there isn't a microphone that's going to wildly make things too loud or too soft. But when you're using a microphone, you need to think about, I shouldn't suddenly talk much louder or suddenly talk much softer. And this can be a really difficult thing for some people, because one of the big tendencies for students is that the sound of their voice is directly proportional to how confident they are in what they're saying. And so the name of my work is a modulation system for FPGAs. And I'm not sure if this is So I'm going to try to whisper so no one pays attention. No, you want to try to talk evenly. Be careful about turning your head. If the microphone is clipped here and you turn like this, you're going to cause a wave system, and although that's pretty cool in like the auto-tuned songs, it's not what we want for a talk. So if you're not using a mic, project your voice. And this can be a good thing to try to breathe from below. You use the powerful lungs that you have to be loud. And look at your audience to work out if they can hear you clearly.
I think that last one's very important because often the speakers who are least confident are the ones who try not to make eye contact, and then they can't tell that actually everyone's going, oh, what? Don't understand, shut the doors, it's not clear. So get that initial feedback from the audience that they can hear you clearly, they're not struggling to hear you, and don't get lost. Don't get into your presentation before you've made that confirmation, because otherwise you might be giving a talk, which I've seen as well at conferences, where everyone's shutting the doors and trying to keep everything very quiet just so everyone can make out what's being said. So be careful about that.
And it can be very important on that point. Don't check in just once. Check in, but then watch people. Because if you start your talk by saying, can everybody hear me in the back? Okay, now I'm going to go on talking. If you do that, then obviously people in the back are going to say, yeah, that's fine. And then immediately go, we don't want it.
I think this feedback issue is very important because your audience is also important to tell you whether you've explained something properly. And as lecturers in undergrad, we do this. We can instantly tell when everyone's going, and okay, so clearly I haven't explained that. I'll go back and explain it again. If you don't have that interaction with your audience, then you don't know. I mean, there's knowing your audience in advance, but there's also knowing your audience in the situation, in situ. And in that case, that constant monitoring of certain people, and you don't have to look at everyone, but you can pick a few people and try and understand. There'll always be the one guy who just sits there looking at you like, rubbish, rubbish. And you don't want to focus on someone like that because you'll lose your confidence. And similarly, you don't want to focus on the guy who's just checking his email. Conferences, half the people will just be there checking their email. So pick a few people who are engaged and then try and gauge from their facial expressions how well you've explained and whether you've made the point clearly enough.
Next thing is, what are you doing with your hands? Using your hands to point can be good, but don't do the same thing over and over and over until it seems ridiculous. Why is this guy moving his hand like that? I don't care what he's talking about, just stop moving his hand. This is crazy. That's what you don't want. Now, this is a great thing that politicians do all the time. Sometimes you even see they'll put YouTube videos together of politicians that use the same hand motion over and over, and so you can make a whole 20-minute collage of the same hand movement for emphasis. But we don't want somebody to think of that when they think of you giving your talk. They should think that you're comfortable and that you use your hands, but they shouldn't think that, why is this person doing that?
I think culture plays a big part in that, because there are some cultures where hands are integral to the body language you use when you talk. So Mediterranean cultures specifically are full of big gestures, and I know that Asia is different. It's so making those gestures can be considered in some cultures as being arrogant or brash. So you don't want to fake it, right? So if you're going to develop hand gestures that you use, you can practice them, but don't turn it into a fake thing. It has to be linked to what you're saying. If I'm doing it naturally, it comes out naturally, right? But if I'm talking and mechanically doing it, it doesn't work. So be careful not to just fake it for the sake of it. If you don't make them, fine, but do not fake them. They look horrible.
This point here is also quite important on that cultural thing. There is, I know, and I've noticed it in our types presentations quite often, that somebody does this. And while it works to point, it's not very nice. And people will notice. So, I mean, the middle finger pointing is is one good example, but there are lots of other cultural things that can be, can be considered very rude. Now,
nodding your head, a very Indian thing. Indian thing.
I don't know. That's
no, actually, in terms of interaction, I've noticed that that is a problem as well, where the nodding your head in certain cultures is common, and someone will say no. And then people are just, people from different cultures it creates this disconnect and they can't quite process what you're saying. So try to, if you know that a certain thing that you do, it will get in the way of understanding, then cut it out. Yeah, so be careful about that as well. Yeah, so practice, practice. There's nothing wrong with practicing too much.
So this is a great one. Everybody loves having a laser pointer. And so it's great to do a laser pointer, except when you do this, where I'm saying, look at every word I'm going to say so that you can follow along as I read the slide to you. And so it's good to have it. Play with it. Get a cat, have it chase around. Get all of that out of your system, because when you're giving the talk, you do some simple things. Circle, make a shape, and then be done with it. Because if you're doing everything with a laser pointer, nothing has emphasis anymore. It's just like highlighting. The laser pointer is to point at one or two things, not to point at everything. So you want to get comfortable with it and get all of the nerdy things that you might do with this out of the way. My supervisor is a Star Trek nerd, so she loved doing some, like, I don't know, the Borg impressions, going around being like, okay, I'm a robot, okay, we're done, move on.
Yeah,
So
make it a CentOS and laser show as well. Just use one laser pointer rather than trying to do two different things.
yeah, do as much as you want.
And before you answer a question, the audience switch it off, right? Don't. No, yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want to blind someone.
Yeah.
So you can say we've got the circle, the underline, the flicking like this, and then there's this, where I'm really just moving around and holding the button, and I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing. I'm just going around in circles, and I'm not really paying attention, but somebody is going to go crazy. And so, like we were just saying, don't point at everything. Not everything is equally important, and your voice should provide emphasis too. So, using emphasis to say, this is the most important thing about my talk, can do just as good of a job as a laser pointer to circle one thing. So, see this thing right here? Don't point at your screen. They can't see it. And in big rooms, when you have multiple screens, don't do this. Say, oh yeah, see it right here? Half your audience can't see that. So you have to be aware that when you have 3 screens, some people are going to be looking at different screens. And so if you want to point out something, describe it. Don't just point and say this right here. So the next thing, I can't remember. Try to get rid of these little words that everybody has, and everybody will have a little bit as you continue. But you don't want it to be a distraction to your talk. I know that in Chinese, one of the common words that people use is sort of a thinking word is "niga, niga," and in America, that sounds like you're in the ghetto, and that you're going to get into a gang fight of some sort. Sounds like we're in a rap video. So think about that as well, that you're thinking, and you don't want to have the fact that you're thinking be something that distracts the audience. So practice. Now, some of this practice is a personal thing. Some people can practice too much, where I've practiced so many times that I use the same exact words and all of the interesting things about how I behave are gone because I've practiced too much. And so we want to practice but not go so far that you're no longer interested. But like we had with the example on the very first slide, we don't want to read those slides like a script. People lose intelligence in front of an audience because you're so nervous about being wrong that you suddenly can't remember what the syntax is for the code that you wrote, or whether this architecture is comparable to this other architecture. Well, you're going to lose that, so be prepared. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the design of the slides themselves. We've talked about how you want to behave in front of slides, but now the slides are your aid. The slides aren't the presentation. You are the presentation, and the slides are there to help you show people what you want to talk about. And so they need to convey information, they need to be readable and understandable, and they need to be interesting so that people actually want to look at the slide and think about it. But we want to avoid overstimulation and avoid things that are boring, and we'll see that. So the first thing is logos. Everybody loves to put a logo of every single person that had anything to do with the project, and it's great that you had support. But you don't need to show every logo on every slide. Put all of the logos on the first slide and all of the logos on the last slide, and then have a clean, simple slide the rest of the time. Because we don't even care about Lucent Technologies, which doesn't exist anymore, or Enron, which doesn't exist anymore. What we care about is your work. So leave space for your work. So in this talk, I'm going to give you a title, and I'm going to introduce, and then I'm going to show you the outline. And then on the outline slide, I'm going to show you another outline. And I'm going to keep recursing and showing you more and more detail about this outline. And then I'm going to tell you that I did work. And then I'm going to show you results of the work. And then eventually I am going to stop talking. This outline conveys no information. It doesn't help the audience do anything. If you're going to have an outline slide, it better be useful. Because everyone introduces their topic, presents their work, gives results, and stops talking. So you don't need to tell us about that. If you want to give an outline, have it be relevant for showing information about the sequence of topics, and have those sequence of topics be more informative than just my work. So this varies depending on the kind of length of talk as well. If you're giving a 45-minute talk or an hour talk, you probably do want an outline because you want people to understand, okay, now I'm about a third of the way through the talk and I'm going to move on to a slightly different topic. If you're giving a talk for 5 minutes, giving you an outline of what the next 3 slides are going to be is completely a waste of time. So we also don't want your slide to be a README. Literally here, we don't want all of the text, all of the code, all of the data on a slide. You have too much to read, and people aren't going to read it anyway. In fact, they're going to be mad that you tried to put so much information on this. And so instead of putting too much information, you want to summarize. You probably don't want any bullet on a slide with more than 2 lines at most, and preferably only 1 line per bullet. And you should practice enough that you know what you want to talk about and you know your work well enough that you don't need every word that you're going to say already printed on the slide.
It's important to note that bullet points are not sentences, right? So you don't need to have or you can just write bullet points, right? Which don't need to obey grammatical constructs correctly. They need to, of course, make sense, but you do not need to write this method shows that something, right? You can just say scalable something and so on. You just use the words that are needed. It's not meant to be something that people can read in prose. That's not what bullet points are for.
When the text gets too small, under 18-point font for a typical conference presentation room, you probably have too much content on your slide. So split it into 2 slides. Split it into 3 slides. Remove some text. Summarize. Make it more efficient so that people can actually see what you're putting instead of seeing you read the slide. So, as an example here for that you can see for yourself, here's some common fonts in various font sizes, and I'm willing to bet that below this line it starts to get pretty unreadable at the back. So even though you're really close to your screen when you're writing the slides, you need to remember that most people will not be anywhere near that close to the projection screen.
Actually, though, you do need to, anything that you can't read on your screen is almost certainly not going to be readable on the big projector. So you can generally use that rule of thumb. If you can't see it on your own monitor, no way it's going to open the projector. Maybe it needs to be slightly bigger, but not by that much.
But yeah, I put that in. Never, ever, ever, ever use Comic Sans, right? If you're working at CERN and you've just made probably the biggest scientific discovery of the last 10 years, you might be forgiven. But I actually remember one presentation by one of the big research labs from a big multinational. I won't say who they are, but let's just say they probably made Comic Sans. But this research lab, they presented the whole talk in Comic Sans, and at the back of the hall there was a whole group of people just going, "Is that Comic Sans? Is that Comic Sans really Comic?" And no one was listening to the talk. So don't do that. Yeah? Use reasonable fonts. You're not writing your presentation for 2-year-olds in school. So please use a proper font. You can use either a sans serif or a serif. Serifs are the fonts which have these small accents, and sans serifs are those fonts. Make it look decent.
And in fact, it's a general suggestion to prefer sans serif fonts. Studies have shown that it takes people slightly longer to read sentences that have serifs, because it just takes the brain longer to process the little ends of these fonts. So if you're only going to make the talk easier to understand by 0.5%, it's still 0.5% better by just using a slightly better font.
And related to that, remember that if you're going to take your presentation on a USB key and use it on a machine that isn't yours, only use standard fonts. Don't use some weird thing that you installed on your own machine, which you're going to get to the presentation and go, "Oh, nothing works," right? And
Yeah,
I've
or use PDF with embedded fonts.
Yeah, or save it to a PDF and embed the fonts if you don't have animations.
So if you say to the audience, "You probably can't see this, but," then you have a bad slide. Because as soon as you are standing in front of the audience and you say, "Oh, actually, you can't see this," you're like, "Well, maybe I should have planned better and actually practiced my talk in front of people." Test on a real screen in a conference room with a distance as close as you can to what the real room in the conference will be, so that you know, "Oh, maybe the font really should be bigger for this."
Yeah, as you said, there are exceptions. Sometimes you want to make that point, that something is too complicated or too big, And in that case, yeah, you do mention that. But I don't expect you to understand this, but all I want you to see is that the problem size scales and it gets all messy and ugly.
Right.
Yeah, there are very few cases where that's acceptable.
Yes. There can be exceptions, but as a general rule of thumb, let your advisor tell you that he's willing to make an exception rather than assuming that it's probably okay to have something that isn't readable. This is a really long title for the single slide. I probably should have just summarized. But that's really hard to read. And even ignoring that I could have changed the lines to not have the lines overlapping with where the title is, there's lots of people that they're not looking at the title anyway. And we probably should just say long slide titles. Because we want the takeaway point to be right there. And we want it to be something that's concise and meaningful, not just a full sentence.
So just on slide titles, there's another point which may well be a matter of style, but not every slide needs to have a title on it. The titles delineate parts of your talk, but if you're going through a proof, for example, there's no real evidence to say that, oh, I should have the word, here is proof at the top of every slide in which I'm showing that development. So I know that in some packages you're able to place a title on the first slide of a section and then hide the titles for the rest of that section. And I do this in teaching because it's just a waste of space. But even in presentations, if you don't need a title, you can get rid of it. Right? There are master slides where you can just switch off the title and just have content. That's fine. Right? So use the titles as and when they're needed, but don't just for the sake of it have title on every single slide. It's not necessarily required.
I'll take that one step further. Especially at Imperial College, they have the world's most retarded template, where 30% of the top slide is the Imperial logo and a whole bunch of colors for the title, which wastes 30% of the space, which you should be using for explaining your idea. So it's completely fair, right? You don't need a title in every slide. And you use this whole real estate for actually explaining your idea, not showing off that you're from NTU. That's completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
First slide it's okay, but over and over again, completely unnecessary.
It's what all of this comes down to is if you're going to have a title, make it meaningful. Having a title that says my proof continued, my proof continued 2, my proof continued 3. That has no meaning whatsoever. So use a title when it adds meaning to your slides, not when it's just, oh, it's part of the template, so I probably should figure something to put here. It's also important to know the boundaries of the slide. People can't read the text that runs off the end of the slide way out into the middle of nowhere. So when you're copying text boxes or figures, realize that PowerPoint will let you copy things into the part that it's not going to show you. And so make sure that you look at your slides and make sure that things actually appear and that you put them inside the boundaries of the thing that's going to get shown. Bullets aren't everything. It's great that you think that there's a lot of detail and a lot of sub-hierarchies and everything relates to each other. But how many levels of hierarchy do you really think you need to express your point? Maybe 2? Maybe 3. But probably not more than that. And even when you're at 3, you probably have a situation where you should take the first level of the hierarchy, make it the title, remove it, unindent everything by 1 level, and go back down to 2 levels. And so you probably don't need more than 2 or 3, and if you ever are at 4 or more, something's wrong.
Interesting again is that some tools do not require all the text to be in bullets. So if you just have a line and a figure, or if you just have one piece of text, 1 bullet point and a figure, there's no need for that to have a bullet because it's not part of the list. So you don't have to stick to bullets. But if you do, please don't do what I've seen some students doing, which is they will copy text with its own bullets, which isn't based on the formatting of PowerPoint. And then when you press enter, PowerPoint thinks that's a new bullet, and everything's messed up because they didn't use the structure of the PowerPoint slide. So when you copy text in, unindent everything, make sure it fits properly, bullets and sub-bullets, so that it's part of the structure of the document, not just that I pasted something with some wonky bullets of different shapes from a text file and it's here now and that's what it looks like. If it's an ordered list with numbers, then use the numbered list format. Don't just write number 1, this number, because the moment someone tries to put something in between, it's broken, right? So use that carefully.
And I'll go further and just say, don't ever copy text directly from a text file into a presentation. If you're doing that, you're not thinking about your bullets well enough. I know it makes things faster, but you're probably not making a good presentation if you're just copying text.
I mean, it's so little text to begin with.
Exactly.
Just retype it. It's okay. Spielchick. How smart do you think people are going to think you are if you're not even smart enough to make sure that every word on your slide is correctly spelled? Similarly, how smart do you think they're going to think you are if you don't have decent grammar? If you confuse there, and there. They all sound the same, they don't mean the same thing. So knowing the difference and making sure that, you're using proper grammar and proper spelling is important, because unconsciously, when somebody uses poor grammar and poor spelling, you think this person isn't careful and they're not, or they're not intelligent. And if they're not careful or not intelligent, then I don't trust what they're saying about the research. Now, I know if your primary language isn't English, that some of these things can be particularly difficult, and so it's important to have other people look at your slides, have other people that are actually going to be critical look at your slides and give you feedback and get you to put things in good grammar and good spelling. So there are exceptions, but in general, you don't want to have text on, or you don't want to have only text on most of your slides. You want diagrams. You want well-drawn pictures because they're easier to understand. Now, on the bottom here, I've got 2 different slides that say the same thing. They show a CPU, a memory, a FPGA. They're connected together. There's a data cache. But when I put it in a diagram, people understand much better than having to visualize the diagram for themselves. And there's this common phrase of pictures are worth 1,000 words. In research presentations, maybe not so many words. But even so, pictures are an important part, because people can look at pictures and listen to you at the same time. But for the most part, if somebody is reading what you have on the slide, they're not listening to you. And you want people to listen to you, not spend their time reading. So one example diagram here, I've got source code that can be mapped onto an FPGA, and I have 2 different regions of source code that map onto an FPGA. There's compute-intensive sections, and we're going to map them, and the hardware can be reconfigured for each section. Now, in this case, I did 2 things. First of all, I have the diagram, and I can move it back and forth, so I see that things are get reconfigured and it makes sense. But also, and an important part, is that I used the flipbook style of animation by having them be 2 different slides, not an animation on the slide. Because as much as PowerPoint loves to give you tools for animation, I don't know that there has ever been 2 versions of PowerPoint that are compatible with each other for having an animation. So if you use animations on PowerPoint, it probably will not work when you try to use that presentation somewhere else. So make it in flipbook style.
Or the other animation that works for me is incrementally rendering text. So for example, in this case, if you had 4 or 5 bullet points, you don't want everyone to sit there reading, as you said, spend time reading the text. So just show them exactly what you want them to focus on at given point in time. So show them the first line, and maybe show them the mapping. And then when the blue region maps onto that, you show them the second line. So you can reveal text incrementally. So you're sort of guiding the audience through making sure they focus on the text that needs to be focused on. That's the only other form of animation I think is okay, along with the flipbook stack.
So the previous slide used flipbook animation. But animation can be very distracting. And so you want to use it in a small number of cases because it can be really annoying when the text keeps moving around and things are happening on their own. Use it only where it's useful. Know if it's actually helpful to understanding your problem before you add an animation. Because people aren't expecting you to be Pixar. They're expecting you to give them a talk about your research. So unless somebody wants to do research into how to make animation movies, I don't want to see animation in the slides. So
yeah, especially PowerPoint animations, but you can,
yes.
yeah. If there are cases where you want to show a waveform or show data that is naturally animated, you can embed a video and show the video.
Sure,
that's fine.
Embed a video. Videos can be great, but PowerPoint animations, none. Make sure that you line up your figures. Put a little bit of effort into making it look good. And it's great that your 3-year-old daughter helped you with putting your slides together, but this isn't really inspiring confidence in the quality of your work. Put some effort. Make it look good. Make it understandable. Now, Nachigit was saying that he likes to do the iterative increments of revealing text. And while that can be really a good strategy in some cases, it's important to don't be tease about showing people what you're going to talk about. If you're going to iteratively add text, have it because you want to talk about one thing and then you are logically going to step through a problem and move on to something else. Don't have every slide come in one bullet by one bullet for no other reason than because you can make people wait. Let the audience think at their own pace. If you want to explore a problem and make sure that you describe all of what you want to do before you tell them the next thing, animation is great. But if you're providing a list of 5 things for somebody to think about, let them think on their own. It only provides a benefit to somebody if there's a surprise or something that you want somebody to think about, a first step before they move on to the next. Think about the colors that you put. I know it probably looks great on your screen, but yellow on blue, or even worse, this red or this purple on blue, it's going to burn your eyes. It's just like, it's painful to look at this. And a side note of that is that if you're ever going to print your slides, you probably want white backgrounds so that you aren't going to use up your professor's entire printer cartridge in a single printing of the presentation. Similarly, you need contrast. So you probably can't read this because there's a ghost here of I've got some white text on yellow. It looks great over here. The monitor, I can read it quite easy. And the light green and the light blue and the pale yellow are perfectly fine over there. But besides me standing right about here, you probably can't read it.
Yeah, there are some, I think, safe colors we can suggest that they should pick from. And those safe colors don't include either of these colors. So if you have a palette that is presentation safe, that is robust across different projectors, then feel free to use those colors. So generally red, green and blue, the basic 3 colors are fine. But whenever you try and do yellow or lighter shades of those colors, it's going to depend on the age of the projector and all sorts of things. So just avoid doing that.
But even this brings up a good point. The projectors will vary, so you're going to have to try it. I gave a presentation once where I practiced it 10 times in Madison before I went somewhere else to give the talk, and on our projector it worked fine. But as soon as I went and plugged into the other projector, all of the colors were messed up, and so I had to very quickly redo the colors on a bunch of things so that it was legible, because that projector just didn't have the same output, it didn't have the same brightness, it didn't work quite right. And the other good point that, not to get unintentionally brought up, is red, green, blue. Red and green are very difficult for about 10% of the population to see the difference of. And so go ahead and use red and green, but you probably don't want them next to each other unless you want to find out who in the audience is red-green colorblind. And so that's important. And notice as well that red-green colorblind is very closely related to red-black colorblind. So if somebody is red-green colorblind, they probably can't tell the difference between reds and blacks either. And so
you can never explain red-black trees to those people.
No, that would be difficult. But even so, you have to think about not just the using different enough colors by your eyes, but use different intensities and different different locations to make sure that things are going to be differentiated. So some basic guidelines for contrast. White background, black text is clear and easy. You can use other dark text colors like a dark blue or a dark red, but don't be distracting. It's nice to use a red or a green or a blue in order to highlight individual words that are important, but for the most part you want to stick to one standard setup. So don't use white on white or white on white as we had on the prior slide, and don't use dark on dark, like a black text on a red black background. So if you don't want to use glaring colors either. You know, we're not trying to be an art major. We're not trying to be a hipster that's showing that we're not going to conform to society's color palette. We just want people to be able to read the slides. So clearly, from this equation, you can see that my proof is true. And I don't even think I need to explain more. But wait. What person in the audience could possibly look at this and understand what it is that you're trying to talk about, including yourself? Because remember, you lost 20 IQ points when you got up in front of the audience, so you're going to look at your own equations and go, huh, that doesn't seem right anymore. So don't put equations. Just explain the idea and the meaning and the goal of what you're trying to accomplish, and say, for more information, I refer you to my paper.
And this is valid only for conference presentations, I think. If you're doing a lecture where you're teaching the student how this equation was derived, then you do need to sort of step through the different things. And I don't know if these guys ever get a chance to lecture at all at NTU, but if you do, just make sure you don't just put this whole set of equations in sort of simplified step by step, so the students can follow what is actually going on in that expression.
And if you are going to have some sort of step-by-step incremental addition of equations, try to put plain English explanations along with it. Because if you can't come up with a plain English explanation for what goes between one step and the next step, you've probably put too much of a logical jump between two steps of the equations. So we want to keep it simple. You don't really need all those equations. It's very dependent on what you're discussing on your audience. Some audiences really do want to see the equations. Nachikit mentioned, if you're trying to teach somebody in a class, sometimes in a defense examination, they're going to want to see a little bit more detail to make sure that you demonstrate the underpinnings of what you're using. But you need to know your audience and know whether it's appropriate to have equations, and make sure that you explain the equations and what they mean, and give a common English explanation of them. Because if you don't need them, don't use them. People aren't going to think that you're smarter just by seeing equations. Just like Nachikit talked about yesterday, about putting too much math in your paper to try to seem smarter, putting too much math in the presentation isn't going to make people think you're smarter either.
I think it's exactly the opposite. There's a rule of thumb, I can't remember who came up with it. Every equation you have in a slide halves the number of people who are listening to your presentation.
You want to use simple examples too. We talked about yesterday how it's important to scale from small problems to big problems to demonstrate that your solution actually operates. But on the slide, in the presentation, is the wrong time to show that you can handle a billion variables. You want to have a simple example. And while it's fun to try to follow the lines that are doing curly cues going through our diagram here, it's not really helpful to somebody that's trying to understand how the algorithm logically works. You also have lots of cool results. But it's sort of meaningless to have a big list of data that just goes tabular form and says, well, as you can see, this data point clearly proves my theorem, because 0.02 instead of 0.61. Yeah, no one understands it. No one can read that. Use a graph. Show people what it means. But think about the graph that you're giving people. Graphs can be your enemy. Putting 5 series with no labels on the series, or the x-axis, or the y-axis, and having all of the data jumbled together so that you can't follow anything or see any trend about it. What does this do to help anybody understand your talk? You want to have data that can show people what you have accomplished, and it makes it clear what the trends are.
So you're going to show, yeah, exactly.
And here's another case. It's like, oh, I put 2 lines. Now, as you can clearly see on this graph, Series 1 is much better than Series 2. Just follow the line. You can see it easy. But make sure that you can tell the difference. Use different bullets, use different markers, use different colors. Don't put outlines that just distract. Using a background that just distracts from what you're trying to show.
And unlike the paper, you're allowed to use colors. Yeah. So make sure you actually use sensible colors, again, that you can see on the projector screen.
And highlight important data points. Say, this is what I think is important. The rest of the data shows that I did a complete experiment, but this is the thing that I think is important. So put something on the slide to circle it or emphasize it. Make sure that people notice the thing that you want them to notice that makes your paper be important.
And you can animate this, right? So we talked about how animation is bad. Can you go to the previous slide? So the only one other justification for animation on something like this would be, I plot 5 versions of this graph, and in the first version I just show series 1 and I explain the axes and I show the trend, and then on the next slide I replot the same graph by just adding series 2 to series 1. The third slide I add series 3, 2 and 1, and so on and so forth. If you incrementally show more and more data, it makes it easier to even make sense of this jumble right now. Right? So try and use animation strategy. Yeah, so this one.
This one isn't going to make sense no matter what. But doing that incremental animation of your results can help you also organize your thoughts on making sure that you talk about the right things at the right time, and you talk about the right data in the right order. So when you're finishing, if your talk is more than 5 minutes, you probably want to summarize the work and the results and give them the main takeaway. Say, explicitly out loud, say, if you only remember one thing from my presentation, remember this. That way they know what the important thing about your paper is, and they know why it was worth listening to you give your talk, and why they should go read your paper. Give your selling points here. Say, I achieved 30x performance increase with only a 10% area penalty. Don't just say, I demonstrated that I have better performance. Give numbers. The numbers will make it more memorable, and people will understand why it's worth reading your paper. So, 3 basic suggestions for good slides is, and all of these we've talked about throughout this presentation, is have the main point of the slide in the title. Have it be meaningful to have a title that tells somebody right away why this slide is important and what it adds to the understanding of the whole presentation. Use pictures and annotate them. Make sure that people can understand why you're showing them a picture or a figure or a graph, and they understand what it is that you're trying to demonstrate. Highlight the important features. And less text is generally better. You can go too far. You can have 0 text and only pictures, and then you're giving a talk to a picture book elementary school class.
I would say there is a very excellent exception to this, where less is more is the right philosophy. And it's this speaker called Cory Doctorow from Boing Boing. He uses single word in the middle of his slide. Just one word, nothing else. No pictures, no complicated bullet points, just one word. And as he goes on, as he speaks, he just changes that word. So he wants the audience to just think of this one idea, and he is a brilliant speaker. Look at YouTube. Find YouTube videos of Cory Doctorow speaking. You'll be impressed by how well he does it.
And that's good, but Cory Doctorow is a famous author, and he's quite good at thinking and speaking on his feet, and none of us are going to be that.
Oh, well, let's not say that.
Okay.
Maybe one of you will.
Maybe one of you will, but none of us will be that. So practice your presentations, assuming that you're not going to be giving a Cory Doctorow talk. You're giving a talk where you're talking about your research and trying to motivate 1 or 2 main points. I mean, there are exceptions. There are
TED Talks.
There are TED Talks where people use very few slides, or they use just pictures. In fact, there's a whole series of talks. I forget which organization it is, where they give you 5 minutes and 1 slide with no words. So you choose 1 picture, and that's what you talk about for 5 minutes. Well, these can be great examples, and these can be great ways of practicing public speaking. But for a research talk, people are going to be unhappy with you
if the whole presentation is based on that one idea.
If you put up 1 picture and you just...
But if you take sections of your presentation and try and use this idea, it might work. But it will take you a while to become confident enough to get there. But go ahead and make sure you are exposed to all these good ideas in presenting.
Right. But either way, your audience will read the slide that you put up. As long as it's in a font that they can read, they're going to read it. But time spent reading your slide is time spent not listening to you. And so you want to have the bullet points be clear and concise, so that people read the slide and then they come back to listening to you.
And a related thing, a lot of people like Prezi. Have you heard of this crazy tool? Don't ever use it. At least my students, don't ever use it. I'll make your life very miserable if you use it during one of the research talks. The FCC and Best Paper talk last year did use Prezi. And one of the people who liked it said actually, oh, this is one of the reasons why we're giving it Best Paper. But that talk was atrocious. was very difficult to follow, you feel dizzy at the end of it. Don't ever do this.
So, just summing up, if you give a bad presentation, your audience won't see your work as great, but they will make fun of you from the back row. They'll say, wow, look at how horrible that is. You can't spell right, all of the colors are wrong, the fonts are too small. Maybe I'm not even going to pay that much attention, I'm just going to play video games while we're going. Minesweeper is a little bit out of date, but I think my advisor is still playing Minesweeper, so I'll let her have that. But you know, maybe they're even going to say, oh my god, this is Comic Sans, I can't believe we're using Comic Sans. But if you put in the effort and you give a good presentation, you'll have an interesting topic at the audience's level with slides that are understandable and easy to see and a speaking style that gets people involved in what you're saying. Then they're going to be happy and they're going to say, I never thought of that. Maybe I can apply this in my own work. I need to talk to this person. And you know, in your guys' case, maybe they're going to say, I need to offer this person a job. And that's what you want. You want them to say, this is a person that I need to work with. You don't want them to say, what's for lunch? And so, with that...
What's a good way of judging whether you've done a good presentation, right? You can't obviously go inside these people's mind to see what they're thinking. But how can you judge whether the audience has interest in what you're saying? Questions after the talk, right? So if you get good questions, lots of questions, then that's a good sign that, yeah, people actually like your talk. They might make your life miserable by asking you difficult questions, but at least they understood it well enough that they're even asking you any question at all. I've seen, I guess 90% or maybe 80% of conference presentations get 0 questions, and that's a complete sure sign of a failed talk if nobody asks you a single question.
The only exception that I've ever seen to that is actually from Andre's group. When Andre gets mad at a presenter, he'll ask a lot of questions even though
and you be respectful. Okay, so one of the things, right, at the end of the presentation you will get questions, and even if the question is a bit confrontational, don't do what Andre does, which is tear apart the person who's asking a question. He's doing you a favor by asking you something interesting. So try and, well, understand what the question actually is trying to say. Sometimes it's a little obscure. But be very respectful to the person who's asking the question. And then maybe if you want to clarify something later on, do it offline. Don't have a fight in front of everybody.
Okay.
Can you go to slide 46? I'm just highlighting a point. Please have slide numbers. Yeah, a lot of default templates don't, and it's impossible for people to later ask a question and get you back to exactly where they want to look. So make sure you have slide numbers, and even better, if you can indicate the progress by indicating the total number of slides as well in your slide. That also helps the audience gauge how far you're in. So if it says 20 out of 155 there's a problem, right? It depends on your style. But at least have your slide numbers.
If you have a lot of flipbook animations, you can scare people by showing
but if you use Beamer takes care of it.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah. But yeah, at least have the slide numbers, because otherwise people can't
Which is the problem with Prezi. It sort of zooms and zips and moves around, and you don't know where to go back. Go back to the tunnel animation.
But this does bring up one other small point, is a lot of people put the end of the presentation, they say, thanks, questions. That doesn't help the audience. What you want people to do for the extra 5 minutes that you're answering questions is to look at your conclusions and think about it and remember how great you are and how they should be using this work. So if you want to put a thanks and question slide to help you like wind down your talk and say, and with that I'll take questions, that's fine. But just do this, where you say, and with that I'll take questions. Thanks. And then back up to the previous slide. And keep your summary slide as the slide that you're showing people during the end of your talk. So it's okay to have that last slide as long as you back up to the slide that you want people to see after you've used it to help you stop talking.
If you're Satnam Singh, you can even make them margaritas at the end of this presentation and hand it out.
Your Saturday student just do that during the presentation. Okay.
Yeah?